We're going to open the best possible way we could with my good friend, Dr. Kurt Campbell. Kurt, as I think pretty much everyone in this room knows, is a truly historic figure in American diplomacy and engagement with the Indo-Pacific. He served most recently in government as Deputy Secretary of State. Before that, as the first senior coordinator for the Indo-Pacific in the White House. He was Assistant Secretary for East Asia under President Obama, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asia under President Clinton, which is when I first met Kurt. We really will get a lot from Kurt. He spoke to us last year by video and said way too much for a serving official, so I'm really looking forward to what a former serving official is willing to say. So please join me in welcoming Kurt Campbell. Okay. I'll take this one. Thanks, Kurt. We're going to do this as a dialogue instead of a speech. I want to open by, so Kurt's been here for about a week, and I wanted to open by asking your reflections on what you've seen, heard. We only have 15 minutes, so you can only talk a little bit about the movie we went to watch.
Okay.
But I hope you do. So you're about to leave. This is your last day. What's your takeaway?
Yeah. So first, I've been a guest of the U.S. Studies Center, and I've had an opportunity to engage with Mike and his team, and I'm just so impressed with the work that they have done, both understanding the nature of the relationship that is so critical between the United States and Australia, but also helping Australians understand these dramatic developments that are taking place in the United States, what they mean for the world, and I hope we can focus on some of those issues today. I always find Mike reassuring. He can look at the chaos and uncertainty in Washington and seem to try to find some areas for hope and continuity. I will tell you that some of us are coming from Washington, D.C. We are a city that is being occupied now by national troops, and so it probably feels a little bit more dramatic to us and more concerning. So I'm grateful for Mike's optimism and engagement. I'll just give you a few things, Mike, that I've seen this week. First of all, I've had a chance to engage with all our friends in government. One of the things that you do when you're kind of an out-of-work former strategist or policymakers, almost every leader in the Indo-Pacific who has come to meet President Trump seeks counsel and advice. I think that's smart. And so we've had an opportunity. We've got a group of colleagues here that are visiting. We spend time behind the scenes meeting with President Lee, meeting with Prime Minister Modi, Vietnamese General Secretary, all the leaders who are basically making the journey to sit in what was once thought to be kind of an exciting and wonderful moment to sit in the Oval Office in the White House now can be quite harrowing. There are now adjectives to be Zelensky'd or to have, a moment in which, your political career flashes in front of you. And so we've had an opportunity to engage senior Australian friends who are busy preparing for what we think will be a pretty momentous meeting between Prime Minister Albanese and President Trump in the next couple of weeks, fingers crossed. I will simply say, and you're going to hear more from Mirarap Hooper in a bit, Australia really as the leading middle power globally and the country that frankly has more impact and influence, Mike, on the United States than almost any other. When Americans say that to Australians, you immediately distrust it, but it is true. There was a moment in the past where that role was occupied largely by Great Britain. It is no longer. Australia sits at the center of the ability to shape how Americans and senior policymakers think about the region and the world, and I hope you take advantage of that opportunity. I would just simply underscore the current government is unique in the world. They've won a resounding election. Your economy has not been affected as badly as other countries. You frankly have the ability to lead, not just in the Pacific and Southeast Asia, but globally. And I want and I hope to see Australia in a outward-facing, engaged, risk-taking posture, Mike. And so that's some of the things that we've tried to counsel and hopefully provide good insights to President Trump and his team. I will just say that I don't think we've seen yet really the outlines of American strategy in Asia and the Indo-Pacific. This is something that, frankly, every administration has had a struggle with, Mike. You may want to focus here, but the truth is the drama of what's played out in Europe and in Gaza and the Middle East has been somewhat consuming. So we're now coming into a period this fall where the president will likely turn with consequence to the Indo-Pacific. And the first session on that calendar will likely be the meeting with the prime minister. And then trip to Malaysia, Mike, possibly, and I think likely, an engagement in Beijing. I think we're all interested, somewhat anxious about that. And then likely a trip to Korea for APEC. So very important period right now. And I will say, I'm grateful for the opportunity that, there are people that still are interested in hearing occasional counsel from someone who's completely out of work. And so the other thing that we had a chance to do, Mike's being modest about this, but Andrew Shearer, Mike, and I had a chance to go up the Gold Coast. A wonderful friend who's a movie producer and director who had done Friday Night Lights, a variety of movies, named Peter Berg. He is working on an absolute epic, which is the story of 4 or 5 young Marines, all football players, who make their way through Marine Corps training and Guadalcanal, all the battles to the islands, Peleliu, and then finally ends in Okinawa. And it is a magnificent, epic story. And we were kind of driving along and suddenly just brought into this incredible movie set, hundreds and hundreds of extras, and they'd recreated the landing zone in Tarawa. I have rarely been so moved. And I don't think the team there knew how much the Pacific mattered to Andrew, Mike, and I. And I frankly left pretty charged up and reminded of what a previous generation, the greatest generation, did, and how that moment of Cauldron really motivated and fused the partnership between the United States and Australia. And Mike, I left that, I don't know how you felt, I left that recharged, determined to try to do what I can during a really momentous, difficult time.
It was a pretty amazing experience. We watched the scene after the Marines had taken Tarawa, and they're all sitting, their hands shaking, trying to make sense of what just happened. So it was even more than a combat scene, actually. It was quite powerful. We also had a chance to have dinner with the director and producer who were looking for ideas for the next meeting, the next movie, and I pitched some of our reports from the USSC, so stand by.
Yeah, so Mike had
nothing more exciting than reforming ITAR.
Mike had a copy of his book that they had parachuted in, barely could be able to lift it, and he was saying, look at chapter 79. And so I think that could make an excellent movie.
It was also interesting because I don't know how many people realize the extent to which Hollywood films are made in Australia. I mean, I didn't know how much. Some of the actors and producers have been living here for over a year doing different films. So it's just another layer of the U.S.-Australia relationship. Let's keep on the summit. Is it an exaggeration to say it's the most consequential U.S.-Australia summit in some time, in years?
I think it's probably the most consequential meeting between an American and an Australian in living memory, Mike, in decades, more than a generation. And really everything is on the table. And the first is just can the natural inclination of the United States and Australia to work together, to show common purpose, to demonstrate mutual resolve, can that come out of the session? That's our deepest, profound hope. We have seen in some of the sessions, it's highly unpredictable. I would have thought that the engagements between the President and Prime Minister Modi would have gone swimmingly. No country was more confident in their ability to navigate Washington. We've got Lisa Curtis here, a really tremendous expert. She'll help us think through on these issues, but they've watched slowly, like a plane crash, just this incredible forward momentum that we've demonstrated in technology and military intelligence really now come to a screeching halt. The two leaders really unable to figure out how to get back into communication, all through, I think, some misunderstandings, perhaps different immediate motivations. And then other leaders, Mike, as you indicated, when President Lee came from Korea, we expected just a train wreck. And he managed very effectively to engage with the president, both with direct shows of respect, but also areas like shipbuilding, common purpose that I think won over the president. Now, of course, later we have the train wreck with what's gone on at the Hyundai offices. But basically, Mike, I think I've seen Prime Minister Albanese up close on many occasions. I will tell you the dirty little secret is that he has been for years the driving force in the Quad, very effectively bringing Japanese friends sometimes into the conversation, helping navigate certain challenges. So I'm frankly very ambitious for this meeting. I'd like him to set a course for U.S.-Australian relations. Mike, as you underscored, there's a lot of stuff that continues the functioning, sort of the permanent government. I think that work continues. I believe that the Quad has been a central feature of global diplomacy. It kind of hangs in the balance right now because of the alienation between Delhi and Washington. I think the only country, the only leader that can help carefully navigate that back together is Prime Minister Albanese. And so I think what I'm looking for from Australia is to recognize the pole position that they currently inhabit and to use that and to be ambitious and not wary and careful. This is a time to demonstrate Australian leadership, and I think Australia's up to it.
So don't stay in a defensive crouch on bilateral issues, but actually shape Indo-Pacific strategy and thinking.
Everything. And Mike, you pointed out, we see a lot of this already, the burgeoning of ties between Australia and Japan. That's a remarkable feature of the last decade. Also, similar dynamics between Australia and India. But, frankly, you can't go anywhere in Canberra without running into a European delegation. As the United States under the Trump administration has basically told Europe, we don't want you invested strategically in Asia. We want you to focus all on Europe. I don't think the Trump team got the message or the memo on this. When you tell Europeans not to do something like that, man, just get ready, get out of the way, because they're going to start coming in droves. So the strategic intent in Europe to do more now in the Indo-Pacific is greater than we've ever seen. They would have been better off to say, come on in, and that would have probably caused them to reflect differently. So Australia is at the center of diplomacy, both formal and informal. And I think if the Prime Minister, I think the tendency might be to focus on some of these narrow economic issues. I think they are like a spur under the saddle. My counsel would be leave those to the side. It feels bad if you're Australia. It feels much worse if you're other countries with much higher burdens. Focused on the immediate strategic. Get a sense of where the United States is going on U.S.-China relations. That really is the big question. You've seen over the last couple of days progress being made between our Secretary of the Treasury, Besant, and the Vice Premier in China on TikTok and a variety of things. He is working on what could be a pretty substantial trip. I think we in the strategic community believe that the course in U.S.-China relations is largely set towards strategic competition. President Trump has some different ideas both about Russia and China, and we'll see those manifested. It's very important that Australia make the argument to the United States, hey, we've got to be informed. We have to understand where you're heading on China. That helps us set our own course. I think Australia can make an argument for the United States to continue the step up in the Pacific. Australia cannot manage this enormous strategic competition alone. What Australia did in P&G yesterday is historic. It should be touted as such. Others will discuss this major agreement on security and on, even more important, rugby. And then also, what's hoped for in other island nations. Mike, so I think there's a lot to engage in. The hard thing is choosing the 4 or 5 topics that you think you can capture the attention of the president. And remember, in these meetings, increasingly, it is not just the president. It's the president, the vice president, the secretary of state, national security advisor, that's the same person, and the secretary of defense, and they sit across you almost as a phalanx. And so, you've got to prepare, you've got to be grateful, you got to have a good gift, all this stuff. I know, and I have high confidence that if any country can manage this effectively, it is Australia.
So you and I have pointed out in various forums that former Prime Minister Abe of Japan was very effective at what you're describing in the first Trump administration, good at the gift, but really good at bringing a strategy to the party. You have to have a strategy. And he also had pretty broad support within the Congress, within the administration. And I suspect on the Quad, which means by definition also rebooting U.S.-India relations, the Pacific, and so forth, there will be considerable support, not only in Congress, but within key parts of the administration.
Mike, I agree with that. And, the model, no one understood it at the time because Prime Minister Abe was so bold, so courageous to go right in. Every other country was kind of in shock. Other countries have tried to do it this time, but it turns out that it takes more than that. You not only have to have a strategy, you have to say that the countries that are effective, they also seem to have some engagements with the Trump family, other kinds of investments. That seems to matter. But I will say having a plan of action demonstrating how what that country can do for and with the United States of purpose, whether it's shipbuilding or investment or natural gas or technology, I think that's essential. I will say one of the reasons I was here this week, I do think there's some areas where U.S.-Australian relations can step up, Mike. I think critical minerals has already been done, but more needs to be done on that. We've launched some important initiatives. We have to double down on that. I would say I would like to see other leading democratic states stepping up in certain areas of technology. We've done remarkable things with Australia on elements of quantum computing, but really AI is going to be the arena of the future. Australia has everything necessary, vast stores of energy, tremendous intellectual technology infrastructure, universities like-minded. And so I'm going to try very hard to see what's possible to make sure that Australia, AI is going to be one of those things, you either get on the bus or you get hit by it. I want Australia to make sure that they can play a remarkable and important role in this.
So for people who think strategically about the region, getting the Quad, keeping the Quad going, getting our investment, strategic and economic investment in the Pacific on track, all those are very, very important. They're not headlines in the Wall Street Journal or the Australian or the Sydney Morning Herald. The headline's going to be about AUKUS. What's your sense about the momentum behind AUKUS? You, of course, have scars all over your back for
I do.
getting that historic agreement up and running and well in train. A lot is happening. What's your sense of the momentum going into the summit on AUKUS?
So I wish everyone could have some of the experiences that we and other of my friends have had. What is remarkable about AUKUS, if you look at it carefully, there are 4 or 5 journalists, and that's it, who cover it on a regular basis. And I would say 4 of the 5 are determined to write everything negative possible about it as they can find. And if you actually start and look deeply at the level, Mike, of cooperation, of engagement and investment, it's a remarkable amount that's achieved over the last 4 or 5 years. But ask most people who are near it, they'll be unaware of it, and they will have basically followed the 1 or 2 negative challenges that have taken place. I will tell you guys, Australia has done a remarkable job at engaging appropriately across the U.S. government, in the Navy, in the nuclear Navy, in the national security arena, in the Vice President and the President's office. enormous respect to Richard Marles. That's sometimes a thankless job. He's the one who's been behind the scenes engaging, helping that along. Vice Admiral Meade. I'm feeling much better, Mike. Look, I'd hate to get too far out in front of this, but I think we can have substantial confidence that this is going to continue, pick up momentum. What is different this time, guys, is not just the amount of resources and the work that's been done in Western Australia. I've never heard such a careful, strategic argument about why the United States and Australia working together in Western Australia has strategic significance. And Mike, special kudos to the U.S. Studies Center for the work that you've done, helping them think through how to make the strategic arguments, which I find increasingly are just unassailable. So even some of the critics, and there are one or two in the Defense Department who have been skeptical, have been swayed by some of that persuasive thinking.
I don't want to end on a reassuring note.
Good. Let's keep it just like the week's been.
There's some pretty obvious challenges. We saw that with the Chinese military parade. We see it with the war in Ukraine. What are the things, from your experience in the State Department, as the number two, what are the things in this region that affect the U.S., Australia, Japan, that we're not paying attention to, that we should be worried about and we're not?
Yeah. So I'll just give you two, and I know we're getting short on time, Mike. Look, the animating worry in Washington right now is really the idea of a kind of 1941 bolt from the blue, something that China would do with short notice across the Taiwan Strait. I will tell you, my own experience and understanding would suggest to me that I think in the near or medium term, I personally might think that is unlikely. I do not think President Xi has the confidence in his own military. In the last 3 years, he's replaced over 100 of the most senior officers. I think they've had very real challenges in procurement. And remember, the last time the Chinese fought with any purpose was in 1978, 1979, and that did not go well with Vietnam. And so the idea that after 60 years that you're then going to undertake the most ambitious military campaign in history, I think it's more difficult, and I think it's unlikely. I think the real risk between the United States and China, Mike, is in miscalculation and inadvertence. Our forces operate in close proximity on a daily basis. Unlike during the Cold War, we do not have the mechanisms, the communication protocols, the ability to be able to navigate through. When Mike was in the White House in 2001 and the EP-3 was knocked down, in fact, he utilized a mechanism. I talked to him on the phone and I told him about the military maritime agreement we had struck with the Chinese. He tried to utilize those mechanisms. The phones just rang off the walls in empty rooms. So, Mike, I worry about that, and I'd like to see a more purposeful effort to try to erect them. We've tried for decades. We've been unsuccessful. Hopefully we'll be able to do that at some point in the next little while. As China's military has grown so substantially, they're not as worried about being at a disadvantage. And just the last thing, guys, one of the great achievements of American foreign policy, which we never really talk about or think about, is the fact that proliferation has been substantially limited in the Indo-Pacific to all expectations to the contrary. There are probably 10 or 11 states in Asia that could build nuclear weapons that have chosen not to. That is largely because of the power and the sway of American external extended deterrence. That feature is going to be challenged. We have something that we rarely really talk about in polite settings, the largest nuclear buildup in modern history in China. Over the next 8 to 10 years, they're going to put 1,000 missile systems in Western China. That's a huge deal, and that's going to have strategic implications. North Korea has continued at a pace that causes anxieties in South Korea and Japan. And we've seen, despite the fervent hope, particularly during the Obama administration, of making nuclear weapons irrelevant, Mr. Putin has made clear they're very much part of strategy. And so there's a lot of swirling uncertainty associated with the relevance of nuclear weapons. And at the core of this has got to be our country's confident that the United States are we going to stand up and play our continuing role? And so on these fundamental issues, can you count on certain elements of the United States as a market? Can you count on us in terms of our commitment to peace and stability? Extended deterrence guarantees, are those real? These are things that have enormous momentum behind them, and the hope is that through careful statesmanship, again, largely we hope in the next couple of weeks demonstrated by the Prime Minister, that he will be able and others to make the argument that as much as some people describe this period of the last 40 years as hell for the United States and terrible deal, that's wrong. This has been a great era for the United States in the Indo-Pacific, not just for the United States, but for other countries as well. The hope is that we will be able to undergird and explain some of these commitments that I believe have been profoundly in the strategic interests of the United States now and into the future.
Kurt, you've been, as everyone in this room knows, a very, very, very important friend of Australia and of Japan and of India and to many people in the room. We lost this past 6 months two very, very important people in the U.S. who really were the stewards of relations and strategy in this region. Rich Armitage and Joe Nye, Republican Democrat, partnered to create really a bipartisan consensus around Asia policy. They collected people. They collected you, me, Mira, and others in this room. Quick final reflection on Rich and Joe, and
Mike,
sort of
for that.
Yeah,
Guys, it's hard to describe what it felt like. There's a relatively small group of people in the United States that has focused on the Indo-Pacific over the last 40 years. That group has gotten much larger of late, but it's a relatively small group. By far and away, the dominant strategic group for decades posited that at the very center of important strategy making was sitting in the big stuffed chairs talking with the Chinese counterpart about the French Revolution, like the idea of strategic dialogue with China, and that somehow these other countries in the region were kind of secondary and you only got to them after you'd figured out U.S.-China relations. And in fact, sometimes you worked on those other issues through the prism of strategic engagement with Beijing. There was an enormously small cohort of people. It's now hard to imagine because this group, we are now dominant in the formulation and execution of American foreign policy. But there was a small group largely focused on, maintaining military relations with our partners in Japan and South Korea and Australia. At the time in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s, led by Rich Armitage, joined later by people like Joe Nye, and it really was a Agincourt kind of thing in Asia. We happy few. We were always at a disadvantage strategically. We didn't get invited to the big conferences. We were often looked down upon by the folks who were dealing with the big issues. But over time, the inexorable logic of it is better to work with partners and friends in constructing a operating system that helped structure engagements with China, that the logic of that became more powerful, more pervasive. And so I was at Rich's funeral, or his memorial, Rich Armitage, at the Naval Academy. I've never been more moved by just about anything. Mike knows that he, at the end of the Vietnam War, saved tens of thousands of Vietnamese sailors, took them all en masse in an armada to the Philippines. One of the men that he saved, who's now a stalwart in the Vietnamese community, put on his Vietnamese Navy uniform. He hadn't worn it in 50 years, saluted Rich there from the stage. Next week, Joe Nye will have his farewell at Harvard. He will be remembered as a major strategist, an optimist about American power, and a deep believer in the U.S.-Japan relationship. I do want to just say that, wrapping up here, the dominant person that helped in sustaining that narrative going forward as a person who's modest about it, who doesn't take that credit, is Mike Green. Mike was the one who worked closely with Rich, who recruited people into it. I knew nothing about Asia when I first started working on it. It was Mike who patiently tutored me, helped me understand the importance. There isn't a trip I take to Asia that I don't reflect on some story or message or strategic idea that Mike gave me. So I was thrilled to be able to be here. My flight was canceled, so I came down in economy class. That's how important this was to be here. I'll just show you guys. So this is fully erect, reclined. Landing, reclined. So just in closing, I'm thrilled to be able to have done this with Mike. I think this is an incredibly important moment. Don't give up on the United States. Work with us. We've faced more difficult periods in the past. We saw that in the looks of the young men who were reenacting the fateful decisions on the beaches of Tarawa. And Mike, I thank you in particular for your leadership role and all that you've done here and for our nation and for the U.S.-Australian relationship and for Japanese friends. Thank you.
You're very kind, Kurt. You're very kind, and I make this promise: when they make our ITAR reform report into a movie, I'm going to have Brad Pitt play you.
That's great.